Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. Richard Eyre.
Hiya, Daniel.
I'm fabulous like you, Mr. Richard, and welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
we miss you on my podcast. for for those episodes that we talk about your books, definitely I miss you.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Mr. Richard, what we gonna talk about today?
I would like to talk about an author who has influenced me quite a bit. He's a guy called Derek Robinson, a fantastic author, British author. So I thought we could talk about him and some of his books today, the books that have um, really influenced. Well, they've sort of influenced me, but there. I aspire to write more like Derek Robinson. Put it that way.
So, which book that you wrote that really influenced you of Mr. Derek Robinson?
There's Derek Robinson's writing is very. There's a lot of black humor in them. Um, the books themselves, they're the books that I'll talk about today. He's written lots and lots and lots of different types of books, but there's the RFC quartet and there's the RAF quartet, and both of these books deal with squadrons in both World War One and World War Two. And there is the first book I ever read by Derek Robinson was Piece of Cake, and that was what turned out to be the first book in the RAF quartet, which was about a Hurricane squadron of Hurricane pilots in World War Two, and it basically tells the story of this squadron from the fall of France in 1940, and it starts in 1939 basically, and it ends basically in the middle of the Battle of Britain in September 1940. I suppose with my writing, what I try to do with Minstrel's Bargain especially was to try and have a type of humor in that book, even though it is a very gruesome and grim book. The sort of humor between Sturgis and his best friend Toby in that book, and I think it was Derek Robinson who showed me that you can actually, not only should you have humor in books that aren't really humorous, but it makes it more realistic, you know. And I think it wasn't until I read Piece of Cake that I realized that that's true.
Yes, and I think he was nominated for the Booker Prize.
He was, yeah, for his very first novel. I think it was his first novel. A book that in fact, I am reading it again at the minute for about the fifth time. A book called Goshawk Squadron, and that was it was the first in the RFC quartet, but not the first chronologically. He's written another three books that it actually is. Well, it's not the last one, because there was a one he wrote, which was in the Russian Civil War after World War One, called A Splendid Little War. But Goshawk Squadron was nominated for the Booker Prize, and rightly so. It's set in 1918, towards the end of the war, and it concerns. It's about a squadron called Goshawk Squadron. And I think they're flying SE-5As in that book. There's different aircraft that they fly in the different books. And that isn't a main character. That's the good thing about Robinson. When he writes about these squadrons, there are characters who come in and then go away again. And there's sometimes there's a main character. And I suppose the main character of Goshawk Squadron is Major Woolley, a guy called Stanley Woolley, and he is a broken man. He's absolutely, as the story goes on, you think he's just he's really awful he's awful to everybody. But you realise it's because he knows that they're all going to die, and it's sort of like the whole pointlessness of war is shown through the eyes of Major Woolley, and Woolley is actually in a couple of the other ones as well. It's clever how he's fitted the in, because there's if you look at it chronologically, there's I think the first one is, it's either War Story or Hornet's Sting. I think it's War Story. I think that's in 1960. And then you've got Hornet's Sting, 1917. Then you've got Goshawk Squadron, 1918. And then you've got A Splendid Little War, which is set after. And you've got some pilots who end up fighting in the Russian Civil War. When the Bolsheviks it was the Red Army and the White Army fighting in Russia.
Yes.
So it's just, every one of his books is all about the stupidity and the pointlessness of war,
Yes.
Told through the eyes of these pilots.
So your book, A Life Eternal, is a big influence of Mr. Derek Robinson?
I think that is an influence there, because the main character in my book, A Life Eternal, Rob Deacon, is a man who fights in World War One, and at the start of the book, at the end of that war, he is a man disillusioned with life slightly, and I tried to go out of my way to show that the war had changed him. Obviously in that book, his life has changed in sort of supernatural reasons as well, but before he even realizes this, he is a man changed by what he has gone through in the war. And certainly authors like Derek Robinson influenced my own thought processes of war. And being a history teacher, I obviously teach about especially World War One. And as a man who has never been to war, and thank God for that, it's you sort of see the human cost of war, because often war is looked at. You look at battles and you look at results, but it's the human cost of war, which I think interests Derek Robinson and certainly interests me. And I did try and put that into A Life Eternal.
Mr. Robinson, all the writing, he's all about military aviation, because he served in the Royal Air Force as a fighter plotter.
He did. He was I don't think he was a pilot, but he did. I don't know if he's getting on. He's like 93 and he's still knocking around and still doing well. And I think it was his national service, if I've read his sort of biography right. And I think that sort of banter between pilots and that banter you get in any situation where you've got a lot of men, young men, all together, you're going to get banter, you're going to get stupid talk. And I think in a war situation, that black humor is what keeps people going, because every time those guys, whether in World War One or World War Two, climbed into the cockpit, the odds were against them coming back every single time. And you just think the bravery of those men, and that age as well, young men, 18, 19, 20 years old, not just kids, being asked to put themselves in that situation time after time after time, day after day, for weeks and months and years. Absolutely amazing. We often say about heroes, and they are heroes, but what Derek Robinson very adeptly puts across is that they're ordinary people with fears and foibles themselves. They're not perfect by any mean. They're just trying the best they can.
Yes, definitely. So aside from being a writer, he is a broadcaster on a radio and television.
Apparently, yes. Apparently so. I don't know. I've never heard any of it. But yeah, I think he's got a few fingers and a few different pies.
Yes, and he's a qualified rugby referee. Oh,
He is.
imagine.
Yeah, apparently loves his rugby. He's written books about the sort of the patois around Somerset and Bristol and places like that, I think. So his interests are very varied. And that's probably why he's such a good writer. I'll tell you what I really like about Derek Robinson's writing, and what really hooked me in when I first started reading Piece of Cake, is his ability to just the dialogue is quick and sharp, and it cuts out, and I wish I could learn to do this myself. My biggest problem is, as a writer, is I'm too verbose, and I often have to go back and cut things out, and that sentence is too long, or I'm using too many adjectives, or things like that, Whereas when you read Derek Robinson's work, it's just dum bum bum. That's it, and it can be so effective, because you'd be reading something and actually laughing out loud at something somebody said, and then they're dead. They've been killed, and I don't know. It's the finality of the reality of war, I suppose, which is so brilliantly portrayed in Derek Robinson's books, and it comes through the dialogue and the descriptions of aerial warfare are just, it's not like you're there, obviously, because I would never know what that's like, but it's as close as I want to come,
Yes. And they said, Mr. Richard, that novel was controversial.
Yeah, it was. I think it was controversial because he showed that pilots were frightened. These young men did get frightened, they wet themselves up when something happened. They're living in this situation where they are being asked, in the Second World War. I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember it exactly, but he said it's the equivalent of, climbing to the Alps in about 5 minutes, 5 times a day and back, and his ears are hurting. He's got blocked ears. He's got the sinuses were hurting. They're losing people they know, on a daily basis, and they're coming close to death on a daily basis. The terror that they're having to deal with starts eating away at these lads' thought processes and everything like that, and I think it was controversial because he showed that these men weren't these, heroes that you get in the old World War II films, stiff upper lip, let's just give, Jerry a bloody nose and all of this. The people like that in the books are very quickly usually dispersed with, or they are shown to be wrong and change their minds very quickly,
Yes, definitely. So, do you think one of the criteria, if you're writing a book, you must be on the scene or you experience it, as Mr. Derek?
I think so. I think you've got to have a great imagination as well, but you also, to write books like he writes, certainly the war books, you have to have a lot of knowledge. You've got to know what you're talking about. I found this when I was writing A Life Eternal. I was double checking things to make sure that the situations that Rob finds himself in World War One and World War Two were real. I was checking dates, making sure that after, when Rob is involved in D-Day, when the day, just before he meets Madeline, the sort of love of his life, I made sure that date was when the British troops were in that town. And I think, yeah, you really have to do a lot of research. It was the same with Shadow of the Knife. The first, that was the first purely historical book that I wrote. And I still think there's probably things that are wrong in it now, but I tried to get as close as I could to the reality of life in the East End of London in 1890, based on internet research, because it was COVID, when I was writing it. So I couldn't even go down to London. Even if I had the time, I couldn't go down and sort of really map it out properly. I had to just rely on basically books and internet research, and what Derek Robinson shows is his knowledge of the aircraft, his knowledge of how it starts up, and his knowledge of what World War One planes were like, going right the way through to the fourth of the RAF quartet, which is about the Vulcan bombers in the early 1960s. So
Yes.
he's telling stories from 1916 and 1962, and the technology is hugely different.
Big difference.
Mm.
A piece of cake being controversial. What is the best highlight of the book?
Oh God, there's so many in Piece of Cake. It's I think it's got to be the characterization. Is great. There's a character in Piece of Cake called Muggy Catamole. They've all got nicknames. So obviously he's called Muggy because I don't know if you know this, but in the UK, a nickname for a cat is a Muggy. Do you get that in Canada? Do you call cats Muggies in Canada?
Yes.
No? Yeah. Right. So he's called, because his second name is Catamole, he gets called Muggy. And he's horrible. He's a horrible, despicable character. There is not one redeeming feature about this man. But he almost acts like as a catalyst for around the people around him. And there is a highlight in that book where one of the other pilots, a young lad, gets so sick of Catamole. Basically lies. He says they're in France, and he says there's this low bridge in France, and he says he flew under it, and he didn't. There's a whole scene where he nearly goes and he terrifies himself. Or did he do it by accident? I think he might have actually done it, and then another pilot says he does it, but he didn't. He sort of pulled back, and then this other pilot eventually, because of their picking on him for him not doing it, he has a go, and of course he's killed. He tries to go under this bridge, and it all goes horribly wrong, and he's killed. And that is a good scene. It's just that's another thing about Derek Robinson, the sadness that he's able. You come to love these characters, these guys, and then suddenly they're dead. And my favorite character out of the entire book, Piece of Cake, is a young lad called, his second name is Gordon, so he gets the nickname Flash. So they call him Flash Gordon because he's so boring, and he's like, he doesn't get jokes and things like that. But war, basically, he goes mad. He's literally psychotic. And when he dies, and honestly, it was so sad the way it's described, because it doesn't describe his death. It's his name is on the blackboard. There's in the huts, the squadron hut for when the pilots' names are on the blackboard, and there's just a little bit where the adjutant comes in and just rubs his name out. That's all Derek Robinson writes about the death of this character, who's been in most of the book, and it's towards the end when he dies that really sort of hits home. There's so many standout parts in Piece of Cake. It is one of my favorite ever books, and I have a very, very dog-eared version of it that I first bought way back in the early 80s. The front cover's missing now. I don't know what happened to that.
Yes.
But it's just very, it's become very close to my heart. And it's just, as all of these books are, but Piece of Cake particularly, I think, because it was the first one I'd read by Robinson, and I was just blown away by his writing. So good. Like I say, very much. Do you know what? I know it's not the same sort of thing at all, but you get the same. To me, I get the same response when I'm reading something like Dickens. Great Expectations is one of my. I love Great Expectations, and that book I'm laughing out loud at because of something somebody said. The way it's written, and then there's just this awfulness as well at this, that comes after it, and very quickly. So you're laughing out loud 1 second, and then you think, it really makes you think. And I think to be a writer who can do that that's a skill. That's a skill that I wish I could bottle.
Definitely great skill.
Yeah.
So do you think if Piece of Cake to be a motion picture, do you think it's the same with Saving Private Ryan?
It should be. They did make a TV series. I think it was ITV over here in the UK, either ITV or BBC. I can't remember. And they made a 6-part serial, of it. But I'll be honest, I wasn't. It didn't speak. I don't think it was very good. They made them Spitfire pilots for a start, and I thought that was a bit rubbish, because I think the whole point of, one of the points of that book is Derek Robinson wanted to show that not all the pilots in World War II were these Spitfire pilots. The Hurricane was the workhorse, if you like, of the Battle of Britain. And I think actually the Hurricane shot down more enemy aircraft than Spitfires did. I might be wrong in that, but I think that's true. And it just, and the people, the actors who took part, I just thought they were too old. There were men in their sort, I would say at the time, probably in their 30s. Some of them in the late 30s. And I just thought, no, these guys are not like the characters that I envisaged when I was reading them. I don't suppose that ever is. There was one guy, I think his name is Neil Duggan, who has gone on to great things, who was very good. He played Muggy Catamol, and I thought he was good. He seemed to capture the unpleasant essence of Catamol very well. But I don't know. The series itself wasn't that good. But yeah, they should definitely make a movie of Piece of Cake. If they did it nowadays with the special effects and things they can do, if they used the dialogue, it's the dialogue. So if they're going to do it, they need to get Derek Robinson to write the script, definitely, because that's what makes his books so good, is the dialogue between the characters.
Probably they will change the title, they think,
I
Mr.
don't
Richard.
know, because it's the sort of the key thing about the book is the everyday life of this squadron, and it's sort of it's their lives interspersed with these just frenetic and furious battles, 15,000-20,000 feet up in the sky. It's just about them just trying to live. They're just young lads, just young lads, and they're just trying to live their life on fast forward because they know they might be killed the next day. So yeah, it's if they ever made a film of it, and if they ever did it justice, it would be a wonderful, wonderful film. Don't let Hollywood get a hold of it, because they'll just put Tom Cruise or somebody in there, and it'll be awful,
Be British
It's got
actor.
to be British. That's the humor is British. The writing
Yeah.
is British. We talked when we talked about James Herbert. I was
Yes.
talking about the Britishness of James Herbert. This just gritty, streetwise sort of down to earthness. And although most of the characters in these books are upper class, as they were, most of them were from rich families. But there's this earthiness to the language, and a sort of a brutality, if you like, to the language. You read between the lines. That's what's clever about Derek Robinson, is you read between the lines. You can pick up things between the lines. I can anyway, and I think that's why his books have been so successful, really.
Phenomenal, as they say.
Yeah, to me, absolutely phenomenal.
So before we go on, Mr. Richard, I want to shout out to the people listening in South Africa. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, especially in Gauteng. Thank you so much. Western Cape, Pupu, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, Pumalanga, and KwaZulu Natal. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower Mr. Derek Robinson and Mr. Richard Eyre. Talk
Yeah.
about the books that really influence
From
you.
Derek Robinson, are we talking about here?
Yes.
I think that probably the two. Well, possibly Shadow of the Knife as well, because I try to put a little bit of humor in the interactions, especially between Jarman, the doctor, and his sort of what would you call him, a manservant sort of thing, a guy called Curmudgeon. It's not his real name, but he gets called Curmudgeon because he's so miserable all the time. And there's humor between them, and there's humor between the police as well. And I would imagine that's the same sort of thing. With Handy and Rose, there is a rough humor between them, which I suppose, if you are putting your life on the line on a daily basis, which those Victorian policemen were doing in the East End of London, you would have that sort of humor. So I think Shadow of the Knife, I think the interactions between the characters, certainly Derek Robinson influenced that. As I've said, Minstrel's Bargain, even though that is a gruesome horror story, the interactions again between Sturgis and Toby, especially, that is influenced by Derek Robinson. And I quite like how it works in Minstrel's Bargain. I've already said to you, if I had the chance, I would sort of tidy it up, but I wouldn't take that aspect out, because the one thing I do like about Minstrel's Bargain is the humor. As the story gets grimmer and grimmer, the humor drains out of it. So, and I like that, because at the beginning of the book, Sturgis is this just a young man. He's only 29 at the beginning of the book, you know, and he's having a great time, and him and his friend have, and it's very, I suppose it's English, but it's certainly Northern English, Northeastern English, where I live, humour, where the people you love the most, you take the mick out of the most, you know. And that's the way, certainly with me and my friends, we, you know, we're always taking the mick out of each other. And saying pretty horrible things, but that's the way it is, you know, and it just funny. So yeah, those two, and I think because of the World War One and Two elements, certainly A Life Eternal as well. Even though that one, because of the character of Rob Deacon, there's not a lot of humour in that book. He's a very sad individual, and he doesn't really get much chance to see the good parts of life, even though he lives so long. But yeah, the sort of description, I think the descriptions, you know, there's a couple of descriptions of battles in World War One. There's descriptions of D-Day and Dunkirk in World War Two, and I certainly think the aerial battles that Derek Robinson described, as well as the writing of Bernard Cornwell, I must admit as well, with the Sharp books and the Uhtred books, just those battle descriptions. I think all of that's in the back of your head, you know, if you've been reading those types of books.
Yes.
And they sort of come out when you're doing your own descriptions of things.
Yes, when we discuss A Life Eternal, we don't talk about your reviews. Can we insert some of the reviews of A Life Eternal?
If you,
And
I would love you to, yes.
yes, and it says, according to Miss Loretta, a brilliant, humane, thrilling story,
Yeah.
panning decades of significant events in world history. Wow. Give you 5 star, Mr. Richard.
I've gotten some lovely reviews for A Life Eternal. It's mostly been very well received, and as I've spoken to you before, I think it's probably my best writing over the course of a book. But it was very different to what I'd written before. You know, I went straight from sort of horror to that. And I think I wanted to flex my muscles a little bit. I think, you know, writing muscles, I mean. I think I wanted to write something different. I wanted to write something about the inner feelings of a character as much as what happens to him. And I tried to do, to be honest, I think I've always tried to do that. I tried to do that with Sturgis in Minstrels. Well, all of the 3 prophecy books, just to try and make them human. You know, because I've read too many books where events are important, of course, but events take precedence over you coming to know your character. And I certainly wanted to do that with Rob Deacon in A Life Eternal. I wanted him to be the main character, main character all the way through. It's his point of view all the way through.
My listeners on Book 101 Review, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our 3rd season with Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef in one of the 5-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen, because Food 101 is bigger, better, and bolder. So, Mr. Richard, what else you can say about Mr. Derek Robinson?
I would just say, if you have even the slightest interest in anything to do with World War One or World War Two, and even if you don't, read these books anyway. And if you are a writer, read these books for how dialogue should be written, because every single one of them it's a learning curve. And every time I go back to Derek Robinson, I think I need to write more like him.
Yes, let's support Mr. Derek Robinson. And I just want to add something about Mr. Derek Robinson. He was born April 12, 1932. He's a British author, best known for his military aviation novels full of black humor. Some of the novels of Mr. Robinson, as I said, Mr. Richard said, Goshawk Squadron.
Yeah, Goshawk Squadron, yeah.
Yes. Hornet Sting in
Yep.
1999. Piece of Cake in 1993. Wow. And Hurricane, the TV miniseries, I think it's based on the piece of cake that Mr.
Yes.
Richard talking
Yeah.
about in 1988 with the same name based on the book. A Good Clean Fight in 1993 covers of Desert Air Force during 1942. Damn Good Show in 2002 covers Bomber Command's early bomber operation of his fictional number 409 Squadron. Oh, wow, there's a lot of achievement of Mr. Derek Robinson. So let's do support him and read the novel because it's one of a kind that give tribute to the past, especially World War One, right, Mr. Richard?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's something else that we can think about it and learn from it. So, Mr. Richard, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much again, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Maricon people, see you soon.